Bueno, nos va a acompañar ahora como primer orador el doctor Kruk, que nos acompaña desde Canadá. Tiene un título de grado en Sociología y Psicología y después tiene un posgrado en la Universidad de Edimburgo en Políticas Sociales. Trabaja actualmente como profesor emérito asociado en la Universidad de British Columbia de Canadá en trabajos sociales, y el primer libro que escribió el doctor Kruk sobre divorcio y separación se enfocó en la experiencia de padres divorciados y el fenómeno de la separación de los padres en el proceso de divorcio. Ha trabajado también muchísimo como asistente social en hospitales y en escuelas, así que tiene una experiencia de lo más variada, una experiencia profesional de lo más variada. Y el trabajo sobre el que va a hablar, o el tema del que va a tratar el doctor Kruk, es la negación de la alienación parental como una forma de violencia familiar. Así que los dejo con el doctor Kruk.
Hello, Argentina, and also welcome to the many delegates around the world to the conference. I'm happy to be with you, and I thank the organizers for allowing me to speak on a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. I've been studying parental alienation since 1985, at a time when the term wasn't even invented. And I've continued my work right until this point. As mentioned, the title of my presentation is Confronting Denialism of Parental Alienation as a Form of Domestic Violence. I'm going to discuss and refute the 14 major arguments that have been posed against the position that parental alienation, or what I will be referring to as PA, is a serious form of domestic violence. So PA has established itself as a scientific field, and we can now confidently assert that PA is a widespread global social problem with profound consequences for children and families. But despite the emerging consensus about the reality of PA, more forceful pushback by PA deniers have sidetracked our efforts to move PA theory in the direction of practical implementation in the form of reforms in family law and therapeutic practice. Yet we must move forward. PA, without doubt, is a serious form of child abuse and domestic violence. Domestic violence and PA go hand in hand. They're two sides of the same coin. The first challenge for us is to ensure, oh my goodness, okay, for some reason my slides, oh, here we go. The first challenge is to ensure that the definition of PA is clear and concise, and that we are very clear about exactly how PA is a form of domestic violence. We have as a starting point an emerging consensus in regard to the definition of PA, as seen on this slide. We also have general agreement on the five-factor model, which captures the essence of PA, helps us to distinguish it from other forms of parent-child estrangement. We need to be clear that whenever domestic violence is an issue of concern, there can be no PA. And whenever we identify a situation of PA, there are no concerns about domestic violence on the part of the targeted parent. Now, a lot of my own research has examined the toxic effects of PA on targeted parents, but most of my work is focused on the standpoint of children and the effects of PA on children. In PA situations, children lose the capacity to give and accept love from a parent. They're manipulated to hate the target parent, despite their desire to love and be loved by both parents. And alienating parents' denigration results in the child's emotional rejection of the parent and the loss of a loving parent from their lives. The severe effects of PA on children are well documented. Here I have 5 categories of effects. First, self-hatred. Teaching hatred of the other parent is the same as instilling self-hatred in the child. Children internalize the hatred toward the alienated parent, believe the alienated parent did not love or want them, and experience guilt in relation to betraying the parent. Their depression is rooted in feelings of being unloved, being denied the opportunity to mourn the loss of the parent, or even to talk about the parent. Second, alienated children exhibit psychosocial disturbance, such as disruptive socio-emotional development, lack of trust in relationships, social anxiety, and social isolation. They have difficulty forming and maintaining relationships. They tend to discard people when they experience a negative reaction to them. They have a lack of tolerance. They have poor relationships with both of their parents. And as adults, they enter partnerships earlier. They're more likely to divorce. They're more likely to have children outside a partnership and more likely to become alienated from their own children. Third, low self-sufficiency, a lack of autonomy, and lingering dependence on the alienated parent are characteristic of these children. Fourth, alienated children experience difficulties controlling their impulses and struggle with addiction and self-harm. Fifth, they're more likely to play truant from school and leave school at an early age. They're less likely to attain academic and professional qualifications. They're more likely to experience unemployment, have low incomes, and seem to aimlessly drift through life. And finally, they're more likely to play, basically, those are the 5 categories of effects. They also have difficulty controlling their impulses, struggling with addiction and self-harm. Now, of the 4 different types of abuse, child abuse, meaning physical, sexual, emotional abuse, and neglect, PA is usually considered to be a form of severe emotional or psychological abuse. However, it often co-occurs with the 3 other types of child abuse. Neglect, because alienating parents' hatred of the target parent is stronger than their love for their child. They're less attuned to and thus neglect the needs of the child. In regard to physical and sexual abuse, children in situations where one parent is absent from their lives are at significantly greater risk than children who have relationships with both parents. There's actually little debate in regard to the question of whether or not PA constitutes a form of emotional child abuse. By definition, PA is commensurate with the classic definition of child abuse. Its occurrence is attributed to human action, human agency, and secondly, it's a significant form of harm to children. So let me turn to the primary focus of my presentation, the main arguments still in circulation against the proposition that PA is a form of domestic violence. I'll summarize each of these arguments and offer an empirically based rebuttal based on current research on the topic. The first claim made by detractors of PA is that due to the lack of credible peer-reviewed research, PA is a pseudo-concept lacking in empirical validity, and as a result, it may be dismissed as pseudoscience. To counter, we need to simply point to the vast amount of theoretical and empirical literature on the topic. There are well over 1,000 articles and books in existence, over 200 research studies published in 10 languages over the past 2 decades, a rapidly expanding literature base, an emphasis on qualitative studies, a growing body of research that tests theory-generated hypotheses, and in particular, the abusive strategies of alienating parents have been well documented, as have the harmful effects of PA on children and parents. Second, it's claimed that clinical bodies such as the American Psychological Association have not recognized PA as a scientific construct. And it's not included as a syndrome in the DSM-5. PA theory has not been identified as a diagnosis by any classification system, nor by any credible professional organization, and has been rejected by mainstream medical, psychiatric, and psychological associations. Well, the DSM, which is published by the American Psychiatric Association, is a marker as to whether a psychological condition is scientifically valid. And although the term parental alienation was not added to the DSM-5. This was because the description of parent-child relational problems in the DSM already encompasses the types of interactions often designated as parental alienation. PA is widely accepted by child and family organizations, such as the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, the Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, and the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, and so forth. The American Psychological Association has published guidelines for child custody evaluations, which state child custody evaluation may encompass threats to the child's safety and well-being, such as the physical and emotional abuse, neglect, coercion, and presence of parental alienating behaviors. Thus, it's disingenuous to say that PA is not supported by the American Psychological Association or rejected by professional organizations. 3, proponents of the concept of PA presume that every contact refusal toward a parent by a child is due to parental alienation. They label contact refusal resulting from family violence and child abuse as PA. Further, courts often dismiss men's histories of family violence as evidence of violence and child abuse when PA is alleged by fathers. The harm that befalls children in separated families traumatized by abuse is the result of the application of PA theory in child custody determination. Well, in fact, few PA proponents presume that a child's contact refusal is always the result of indoctrination by the favored parent. There are many possible causes of a child's contact refusal, and a careful evaluation must be conducted to determine the cause in each case. Children who allege being victimized by an abusive parent should be believed in the first instance, and only when family violence or child abuse is ruled out should the possibility of PA be investigated. The claim that's made in this slide reflects confusion about the 5-factor model. Which states that contact refusal is not, which states that central to the definition of PA is that contact refusal is not the result of previous child maltreatment, and parents and children should have previously maintained a prior positive relationship. And as far as courts' dismissal of father's violence is concerned, researchers found that family courts do not dismiss either a history of family violence in custody cases or mothers' concerns about family violence when PA is alleged by fathers. Research has shown that alienating mothers' claims of abuse against alienated fathers are not being discredited any more than they are for alienating fathers. Factors like custodial status are better predictors of child custody outcomes than gender. For example, one study found that gender only explained 10% of child custody outcome variance. Gender differences were statistically insignificant. Next, it's claimed that abusive men hide behind claims of PA as they continue their abuse and gain legal custody of their children. Fathers claim to be victims of PA to deflect attention away from their own violence against mothers. Parents who claim to be victims of PA are more likely to be abusive parents. Their allegations of PA are false. They use them as a legal strategy in applying for sole custody in court in order to continue their abuse and control over their ex-wives. So how do we address this? First of all, I think we can all agree that violent and abusive parents should not be granted legal custody of their children, that child's safety remains a primary consideration in the legal determination of living arrangements for children. But there's a substantial body of research demonstrating that alienating parents, in fact, are more likely to be abusive parents than targeted parents, and they are the ones more likely to make false allegations of abuse. A recent study in the Journal of Family Violence found that parents who have alienated their children have an 82% greater probability of having a substantiated claim of abuse against the children than alienated parents. They also found that alienated parents have an 86% these are targeted parents, have an 86% greater chance of having a false or unsubstantiated claim of abuse against them than alienating parents. Such false allegations are a form of coercively controlling abuse. Another study found that only 10% of allegations of abuse made against alienated parents were determined by legal authorities to be substantiated. Which means that 90% of abuse allegations were determined to be false. Only 7% of alienated parents who were charged with abuse had any findings of abuse against them. And these were mainly mothers. So the assumption that abusive alienated parents are mostly fathers was found to be untrue. But when mothers make an allegation of abuse, substantiated or not, they're likely to obtain sole custody of their children. False allegations are considered to be the silver bullets in court proceedings aimed at alienating children from the other parent. There's no evidence to substantiate the claim that there's a pattern of abusive men alleging PA to deflect attention away from their own perpetration of partner violence. Number 9, PA proponents support a legal presumption of shared parenting and advocate for shared parenting even in family violence situations. Well, arguments against PA are often paired with arguments against shared parenting as a presumption in family law. But there is, in fact, strong research evidence in support of a legal presumption of shared parenting, as well as strong public support, as in the best interests of children and as a way of preventing parental alienation. Proponents of shared parenting take the matter of family violence very seriously. I can attest to this as president of the International Council on Shared Parenting, which in our conference on domestic violence and shared parenting, we concluded that domestic violence must be treated as a criminal justice issue, and barriers to making perpetrators accountable and victims protected, these barriers need to be removed. Victims of severe violence require the full protection of the justice system, and child protection authorities must recognize that children witnessing violence, including alienating behaviors, is a child protection matter. So it's recommended that rebuttable presumption against shared parenting and joint custody in family violence cases. In addition, proponents of shared parenting recognize that although most high conflict divorces do not involve domestic violence, fully 50% of first-time family violence occurs within the context of adversarial divorce and legal sole custody determinations. The threat of losing one's children in a custody context exacerbates conflict, can rather create first-time violence, whereas shared parenting is associated with decreased conflict levels. Now, 6, it's claimed that in situations of family violence, men are overwhelmingly the perpetrators and women are the victims. Women, and when they do perpetrate violence, women only perpetrate it in self-defense. Well, over the past quarter century, traditional ideas about domestic violence have been examined more carefully, leading to the conclusion that outdated notions of domestic violence are actually a factor in perpetuating the problem. The current state of knowledge on domestic violence concludes that domestic violence is not a gendered phenomenon, and that the gender paradigm is essentially flawed. Research has in fact revealed a gender symmetry regarding the incidence of domestic violence. Although without doubt, the victimization of women is never to be taken lightly, as women suffer greater injury from domestic violence, the assumption that women are most often the victims and men the perpetrators is false. Women and men are equally both victims and perpetrators of domestic violence. According to the US Centers for Disease Control, for example, 6.5% of men and 6.3% of women have experienced intimate partner violence in the past year. Now, most domestic violence is situational rather than reflecting a cycle of coercive controlling behavior. Most domestic violence is reciprocal or bidirectional in nature. But of non-reciprocal or unidirectional abuse, situations, women have actually been found to be perpetrators in 2/3 of cases. Women in intimate relations are twice as likely as men to use unilateral violence, yet their perpetration is met with greater approval than male to female violence, or less disapproval. And female initiation of partner violence is the leading reason for a woman becoming a victim of violence herself. Now, in the context of child custody disputes, domestic violence appears in different forms, but mutual violence is the most common type, with male battering, the classic cycle of violence paradigm, constituting less than 1/5 of domestic violence in separation cases. So, gendered family violence is nothing more than a political ideology at odds with the prevailing scientific research on family violence and partner abuse. Next, it's claimed that parental alienation is a gendered phenomenon, and which only seems to affect men. More to the point, the use of PA allegations is highly gendered and frequently used by fathers against mothers. Mothers, not fathers, are the ones being accused of being alienators. Women are being falsely accused of alienating behaviors, so the use of PA theory should be banned. Well, it turns out that, as with domestic violence, PA is not a gendered phenomenon. Men and women are both perpetrators and victims in similar proportions using nationally representative samples, and equally likely to abuse their power when granted legal sole custody or primary caregiver status. Legal sole custody determinations give power to alienators who abuse this power to exclude the target parent from the life of the child. So, although mothers are found in family court to be the alienating parent more than fathers in about 70% of cases, these gender differences are due to custodial status, with mothers more likely to being granted primary custody of children. Alienating behaviors are also a form of domestic violence against women. The lack of acknowledgement that women are also victimized by PA by their male partners renders these victims invisible. And finally, although there are some parents who make false allegations of PA, it doesn't follow that consideration of PA should be banned from use in family court. This position is especially concerning given that only a small proportion of domestic violence allegations are substantiated when raised in PA-related legal proceedings, less than 10%. One could make the same argument that domestic violence allegations should be banned in court because they're often misused. One study found that 30% of domestic violence allegations in court were levied immediately after the court filing of PA, perhaps out of retaliation. Next, it's claimed that the actual frequency of PA is low, whereas rates of domestic violence, intimate partner violence are high in child custody disputes. PA is a problem of extreme individual pathology and not a widespread systemic problem. Well, in fact, the opposite is true, as researchers found that substantiated domestic violence in contested custody cases are relatively low, yet the frequency of PA is high, with 32 to 36% of parents in Canada, the US, and the UK report being the target of alienating behaviors. Further, PA is both a personal and a political, an individual and a systemic problem. The removal of fit and loving parents from children's lives via sole custody decrees is not only exacerbating PA, it's a kind of a form of collective parental alienation in itself. And although the rate of domestic violence in child custody disputes is relatively low, fully half of first-time domestic violence occurs in the context of adversarial divorce and child custody battles. It's entirely preventable by means of establishing shared parenting as the foundation of family law. A judicial order of shared parenting with clear guidelines regarding residential arrangements and decision-making authority is associated with reduction of conflict, prevention of first-time violence, and a bulwark against parental alienation because the child's ensured quality parenting time with both parents. PA is widespread in legal jurisdictions where sole custody outcomes and primary residence decrees are the norm. Next, there's little convincing evidence that PA can cause serious consequences in children and targeted parents. Well, in fact, there's robust evidence that parental alienating behaviors are extremely harmful to children and target parents, a cause of significant harm and a serious form of both domestic violence and child abuse. As I detailed earlier, there's much research on the long-term consequences for children that persist into adulthood. PA is just as debilitating as physical or sexual abuse of children. It's for children, PA is child abuse writ large. I think we can be fairly confident in the research base to conclude that fact. And for affected parents, alienating behaviors are a form of complex trauma, precipitating a grief reaction that contains all the major elements of bereavement. Failing to acknowledge the psychological abuse that alienated children and parents are subject to in severe cases of PA leaves them vulnerable, unprotected, and at risk of severe harm. 14, it's harmful to remove a child from a parent as part of, or rather, claim number 10, it's harmful to remove a child from a parent as part of a PA treatment plan. Such a change of residence is more traumatic than exposing children to parental alienation behaviors. Well, granted, it is disconcerting to remove children from one parent and place them with a rejected parent, given that PA is a severe form of emotional child abuse linked to other forms of neglect and abuse. The research evidence, because of that fact, supports this approach of child removal in severe cases of PA. When children are removed from an alienating parent, it's usually ordered as a temporary measure when child removal is necessary to counter the toxic effects of PA. Transfer of custody to an alienated parent and restricted contact with the alienating parent are recommended only when all other efforts have failed and the child is determined to be in need of protection from the offending parent. Children who experience or witness any form of family violence need protection, as the safety of children is the main priority in these cases. Interventions for lower risk children who are less severely affected focus primarily on education and prevention, while moderate and severe forms of abuse require more intensive interventions. We rarely question the necessity of out-of-home placement in severe physical abuse and neglect cases, and support services are provided to the family so that a path toward reunification is possible. The same treatment approach is applied in cases of severe PA. The argument about removal from the care of an alienating parent being harmful for children is not supported by scientific evidence. Rather, the research indicates that transfer of custody of children to an alienated parent in severe cases, along with a reunification plan for the family, is the most effective intervention. Argument 11. What children and adolescents say they want should be the deciding factor. There's a corresponding duty to listen and respond to children's accounts of family violence with a view to validating those experiences, ensuring that decisions are better informed so that child safety and welfare are promoted. Well, there is general agreement that the voice of the child should be considered in child custody determination, but there's a difference between children being given a voice and be given the full power of choice in their living arrangements. Children should have a voice, but not a choice. Children lack the mental and emotional capacity to understand the long-term effects of their decisions. When children have been alienated, they've adopted a distorted perspective of the alienated parent and are provided distorted information by the alienating parent, both of which make the child's views about living arrangements biased and inauthentic. Clinical researchers have raised concerns about the child's voice if their voice has been compromised or negatively influenced. In cases of PA, children have been indoctrinated and lose their ability to think in a logical manner and to base their feelings and opinions on their own life experiences. In such situations, the child's voice can be used as evidence that PA has happened and considered in the greater context of the evidence presented. Now, the next claim made is that there's little or no data on the treatment of PA and no evidence of PA treatment effectiveness. Forced reunification against a child's will and without taking into consideration the child's point of view and emotional well-being can be expected to reinforce a sense of helplessness and powerlessness in an already vulnerable child. Such, quote, treatment can be expected to do more harm than good, causing lasting psychological damage, especially when children who claim the parent with whom they're being forced to reunify with is abusive. So, while there may be less data on the treatment of PA than other forms of family intervention, there is agreement that PA needs to be treated as a form of domestic violence and child abuse. Further, there's a lot of evidence of the effectiveness of a number of inpatient and outpatient programs of family treatment and reunification programs for severe cases. These studies demonstrate how treatment of PA, including specialized intervention with children and targeted parents, and reunification programs are vital to the well-being of children and parents. One study of practitioners' views on predictors of and barriers to the success of reunification therapy found that how success was defined, whether joint sessions were offered, and the number of barriers to reunifications were factors in treatment success. When clinicians conceptualize the goal as resumption of parenting time, reunification is more likely to occur. One of the more common interventions is ordering children to individual counseling to cope with parents' conflict. While this intervention is well intended, it's contraindicated in cases of PA. Children often remain in open-ended therapy indefinitely, and if they're being alienated, their alienation becomes worse because it's often reinforced by the treatment provider. Sadly, the alienating parent often has court-ordered medical decision-making of the children and will shop for a therapist who's sympathetic to their perspective and will transfer care to another provider if they become suspicious of the alienating parent's alienated parent. Yeah, if they become suspicious. It is the treatment of the entire family system with an eye toward protecting the child from abusive behaviors of the alienating parent that is shown by research to be the most effective. The next claim is that expert witnesses on PA have vested financial interest in identifying alienation in court proceedings. I'm on track here. Yes. Custody evaluators dismiss allegations of abuse made by mothers, particularly if a father claims to have been alienated. Expert witnesses need to be trained on the widespread use of false alienation allegations in child custody disputes. While the issue of false positive identifications of PA in contested child custody cases, which leads courts to conclude that PA exists in cases where it really does not, is a hot topic of research these days. And researchers agree that evaluators should thoroughly investigate reasonable alternative explanations of the children's and parents' behaviors, including distinguishing between irrationally alienated children from children whose negative or rejecting behaviors do not constitute PA. Anecdotal reports and non-peer-reviewed research have been used to promote the argument that custody evaluators are biased and are discrediting mothers' allegations of abuse and recommending custody of children go to abusive fathers alleging PA. Yet several peer-reviewed studies using nationally representative court-based samples found that child custody outcomes rarely differ when a custody evaluator, expert witness, or guardian ad litem are involved in the case. Such experts charged with providing their professional opinions on the scientific evidence for PA and its interventions serve as fact finders for the court to help the court determine what type of family conflict is at issue. While these professionals are paid, doesn't mean that they're vested in the court concluding that PA has occurred. Their role is to investigate all possible explanations for a child refusal or to have a relationship with a parent so that the appropriate intervention can be applied.
Word, you should be start wrapping it up.
I'm not sure what's happening. I have one more point to make.
Okay.
Okay. If I turn on the sound, then it reverberates on my end. So finally, it's alleged, number 14, that parental denigrating behaviors only backfire against the parent who gave them, and children react negatively to such attempts. So it's not possible for a parent to denigrate the other parent and to turn children against them. And the parent charged with alienation is not responsible for the child's rejection. Well, there have been over, again, 50 peer-reviewed empirically based studies published on parental alienating behaviors, 13 of which make direct connections between parental alienating behaviors and manifestations of parental alienation in children. And I'll leave it at that. There's ample evidence to counter this argument as well. So in conclusion, the intentional misrepresentation of data and key findings on domestic violence, parental alienation, and shared parenting research results in significant harms befalling children and parents. Those who make false claims and report erroneous information, ignoring the multitude of scientific data at their disposal, are culpable of a breach of ethical responsibility. It's notable that the most vocal critics of parental alienation neither publish empirical research nor participate at international conferences to present and discuss their perspective and be held accountable to the scientific community. I'll skip that part and just conclude with just this statement. Most of the shrillest arguments against the concept and theory of parental alienation are lacking in scientific integrity and can be easily dismissed. I've summarized 14 of the most common arguments, and I trust we can leave these to rest. Our task now is to foster meaningful dialogue among scientists, practitioners, and policymakers, and legislators in the field of parenting after divorce and family violence toward the establishment of more humane forms of child custody determination that effectively address both phenomena, PA and domestic violence. I leave you with this reference here, which is the article on which my talk today is based in the American Journal of Family Therapy. It's an open access article, meaning that you can download it free of charge from the American Journal of Family Therapy. Thanks for your attention today, and I'll stop at that point. And I apologize for some of the technical challenges we've had.